Hi everyone! So yesterday we spoke about filtration and evaporation. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to use those and show you how we're going to take copper oxide and sulfuric acid to make copper sulfate crystals. But before I do anything, I need to get my safety equipment. Okay, now I'm ready and I can start with my practical. The first thing I need to do is work through what equipment I need. The first thing I'll need is two 125 milliliter beakers, one with 100 milliliters of water and one empty. I will also need an evaporating basin. I've set up my Bunsen burner here ready. I've got my Bunsen burner on a heat-proof mat, a tripod and gauze on the top. I've also got a conical flask, a funnel, a measuring cylinder, a pipette, two spatulas, a thermometer, and some filter paper. This will all go along with the ingredients for my practical, copper oxide and sulfuric acid. Step one is going to be to measure my sulfuric acid. To do this, I'm going to use my measuring cylinder. I'm going to need 25 milliliters of sulfuric acid. I'm going to put this on the table and I'm going to come down so that 25 milliliters is at eye level. So 25 milliliters is here and I'm going to carefully pour while leaving the measuring cylinder on the table. Perfect. I'm then going to transfer my sulfuric acid into my empty beaker. Now that I have my acid, I need to heat it to about 60 degrees. And I'm going to use my Bunsen burner to do that. Before I start, I'm going to make sure that my Bunsen burner is completely closed so that when I light it, it'll be on a yellow safety flame. I'm going to take my gauze off whilst I light it. I always do match first and gas second. My gauze back on the top. I can put my acid on top of my gauze. I'm going to get my thermometer, place it into my acid, and I'm going to turn my Bunsen burner onto a blue flame. The acid will heat up nice and quickly, so I won't have to heat it for particularly long. Now that the acid has reached 60 degrees, I'm going to turn my Bunsen burner so it's back onto the yellow safety flame, and I'm actually just going to turn it off at the gas for now. Very carefully, I'm going to take my acid off of the top and pop it down here. Now I have to add my copper oxide to my acid. Now I need to add this in abundance. So what I want is for there to be some copper oxide dissolved into the sulfuric acid and some left over at the bottom. When I first get the copper oxide, you'll see that it is a black powder. But when I add it and stir it in, you see that it's turning a dark blue colour. Now I can see that there's still copper oxide at the bottom of my beaker. So I'm continuing to stir until it's all dissolved. I've added a little bit more copper oxide, and what I can see now is that I've got a blue liquid and I've got a little bit of black powder at the bottom. What I'm going to do, just in case, is add a little bit more. You can see now that my copper oxide and sulfuric acid solution has gone back to being a black colour, and that's because I've added the copper oxide in abundance or in excess. So there's still solid copper oxide at the bottom of my beaker. That's what I need to make sure that all of the copper oxide has dissolved as much as possible, because if there's none left, I don't know if any more could dissolve. What we're going to do next is use filtration to separate the copper oxide and sulfuric acid solution from that leftover solid copper oxide. To filter the solution, I will need a funnel, a conical flask and filter paper. So I can set up my funnel and my conical flask very easily, but my filter paper needs to be set up in a specific way. You need one piece of filter paper and it needs to be able to sit in your funnel. So how I do it is I fold it in half once and then in half again. This gives you a sort of triangular shape. What you can then do is poke your finger into one side and open it up like this, and it will sit in the flask. It won't sit perfectly to start with, but once you start pouring liquid in, it will. Now that the liquid's out of the glass, you can see just how much undissolved copper oxide there was left in there. And we can already see the pure blue liquid coming through into my conical flask. Now that this is completely filtered, you can see all of the copper oxide left in the top of the filter paper. I'm going to put this to one side because we're not going to use it again. Now that we've completed our filtration, we need to do our evaporation, because this is copper sulfate, but what we want to make is copper sulfate crystals. Now there are two different ways to do this: long evaporation and short evaporation. I don't have 7 days to show you long evaporation, so what we'll be doing today is short evaporation using our Bunsen burner. We can't use the Bunsen burner to directly evaporate the copper sulfate because it gives off some really nasty fumes, but what we can do is use our beaker with 100 millilitres of water and our evaporating basin on top. That way, it's a slow heat from the steam of the water that is affecting the copper sulfate, not directly the heat from the Bunsen burner. I've lit my Bunsen burner. I'm going to transfer my copper sulfate into my evaporating basin. I'm going to put my beaker of water on top of my gauze and my evaporating basin on top of that. Once it's all set up, I'm going to turn my Bunsen burner to a blue flame and leave it to heat. whilst I wait for this to heat, because it will take 25 to 30 minutes, I want to have a look at some crystals that I've made earlier. Now, these crystals were made with the slow evaporation process, so they're quite big. You can see this one is more of a turquoisey blue, which means that whoever made this has not added the copper oxide to excess. This is a really lovely big blue copper sulfate crystal. It's the right colour and it's a good size. These crystals were made by leaving them on a windowsill to evaporate for 7 to 10 days. That way, they all came together and really slowly got rid of the moisture. Whilst we wait for this to evaporate, and now we've looked at these crystals, I'm going to give you some questions that I'd like you to work on. Now that these are done, we can see that it's made much smaller crystals than the ones we looked at earlier. That's because we evaporated this quickly over a short space of time, and these ones took a little bit longer. And that's the end of our practical. We've looked at filtration and evaporation, and we've made crystals, crystallization. Thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.